I would like to come on here today and share a little time and speak directly to every survivor of abuse. And also take a moment and share a little bit of my personal testimony as well. There's a story in the Bible in 2 Samuel chapter 13. It's a story of a young lady by the name of Tamar. Her half-brother, Amnon, loved her. He was obsessed with her. And he took advantage of his power and took advantage of his position, and he abused Tamar. There's so many nuances to this story, but I want to focus on one thing in particular. Tamar was hurt. She was wounded. She had been abused. The Bible says that she tore her garment. It was a coat of many colors. It was her identity. And I want to speak to every survivor that the abuse that you have endured may have taken your innocence, but it could never take your identity. She was still a princess. She was still daughter to the king. But it broke her, and it wounded her deeply, and she lived a life of silence. I want to take a moment and tell you that silence is not the answer. You need to talk to someone, whether you share it with a authority, a spiritual authority, or the actual authorities. You need to talk to someone. I was a 30-year-old man before I was able to really talk to someone about what had happened to me between the ages of 8 and 10. And during that time of sharing, I learned some things about myself, that I was full of unforgiveness and bitterness and even hatred. But through the caring words of someone who would listen to me, I was able to forgive and move on. And I want to tell every survivor watching this right now that there is life after this. You do not have to live the life of Tamar, a life of silence. And the Bible says that she lived the rest of her days in desolation. She should have went and talked to the king. She should have went and told someone. What a wounding moment for her. And she lived the rest of her life in desolation. That does not have to be your story today. I'm speaking to survivors that whether you were hurt by someone in authority, a family member, whatever it may look like for you, I want to tell you that there's a future after this. There is forgiveness. There is power after this. I was over 40 years old before I spoke to my mother and father about the wounds of my past. And for me, it was liberating. I know it was difficult for them to hear. They were great parents. They had no idea. But the years of my life that I wish I could get back, that I lived those years in silence and in secret pain and in secret darkness, and many times in full-on depression, hiding all of my emotions through, sometimes through humor, sometimes through anger and violence. But the Lord really began to help me when I began to speak and I began to talk. And I want to speak to every survivor listening, maybe watching right now. I want to tell you that the life of Tamar does not have to be your life. It was my life for so long. But when I finally began to speak, I began to talk, I found someone who would listen to me and hear my story. It brought me so much freedom. Through that, through prayer, through trying to live a life pleasing unto the Lord, I found a way back, and I found a way to ministry and a life of wholeness. And I want to tell you that today, that God has a life of wholeness prepared for you. And I want to tell you that I'm making this video today for SafeChurch, and SafeChurch is right now in the process of creating tools to put in the hands of leaders and pastors to help deal and mitigate this exact topic that I'm talking about today. We have to talk about it, and we have to create a place for you to talk about it as well, because more than anything, you need to talk about it. I love you. I'm praying for you. I believe in you, and I want you to live a life of wholeness. God bless you, and you are in my prayers.
As Christians, sometimes we have the false notion that abuse is something that happens to other people. people who aren't saved, people who are living an ungodly life, and dare I say, people who ask for it because of the way they look, the places they go, the choices they make. We think that abuse happens to sinners, not to saved people, but that simply is not the case. There is a global epidemic of abuse, and Christians are not immune to this. Christians also are not immune to the shame that comes from being abused. That's why sitting on your pews, there are countless survivors. Statistics show that 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual abuse, and nearly 1 in 4 men have experienced sexual abuse. You probably have no idea that they are survivors, but they are your Sunday school teachers and your small group leaders, your new converts and your established saints, your preachers and your worship team, your young and your old. Most of them suffer in silence because the fear of speaking up for help overshadows their pain and sorrow. Some survivors experienced abuse before they found God, some after. But each and every one of them needs the church to help them find the wholeness and healing that can only come from God. Survivors don't all look the same because each instance of abuse is unique. For some of them, you would never guess in a million years because they have become so good at hiding their scars. I was one of those. You see, survivors process the abuse in different ways, and most of us develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. That means some of us will rebel and act out because we feel like, what do we have to lose? We think our lives have already been taken from us. Others, like me, will become the very best good girls in your church. We often are the hardest workers in your church. You see, I was working harder and harder to earn God's approval, to earn your approval, and to try to undo what had been done to me. And neither of these responses to abuse is healthy. Both coping mechanisms are cries for love and acceptance from God and from others. More than anything, abuse survivors need to know that nothing that happens to them is greater than the God at work in them. We need to know that we have a hope-filled future and we can accomplish great things for God. We need the church to be the hands and the feet of Jesus to help us find that hope. So what are some specific things abuse survivors need from the church? Ultimately, we need love and understanding and compassion. Survivors need to be heard and valued. There's nothing you can say that can undo what has been experienced, but your listening and your loving response can help bring about healing. Listening and loving means we won't be judged or blamed for what happened to us. And we also must not be shamed into silence. We need the dignity of not having to defend ourselves from accusations or assumptions. We need the church to protect us. Abuse survivors, they don't want your sympathy. We don't want pity. We need to know that you don't view us as damaged goods or as someone you need to keep an eye on. We need you to understand that we may not be able to simply pray through our situation. We may need professional help in addition to what we receive from God around your church altars. And our healing may take time. Survivors may have a hard time trusting, so we need time and space for trust to develop again. But please, please don't give up on us. If the pain causes us to isolate or to drift from God, please continue to surround us in love and reach out to us because we need you now more than ever. We need to know that you love us even in our darkest moments, and you will be here for us. We also need to know that the church is doing everything possible to prevent abuse from happening to anyone else. And the church is fully committed to binding the wounds of the broken. That a program like SafeChurch will help raise awareness of how to minister to abuse survivors, and it will equip churches to prevent abuse from happening. Ultimately, we need hope that God can and does transform the evil for good when we surrender our hurts over to Him. There's a powerful statement that rings true for survivors of abuse. It says, trauma creates change you don't choose. Healing creates change you do choose. The church has an incredible opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Churches can help abuse survivors choose healing and receive the hope that God's very best for us can still be found.
On behalf of the United Pentecostal Church International, to any of our members or attendees who have experienced unthinkable hurts and traumas, I would like to express our deep sorrow. Some of these abuses happen outside the church, and other instances took place through connections within the church. Regardless of where or how a person experiences abuse, there is no excuse or justification for those actions. The church has a mandate to prevent abuse and to minister to victims of abuse. It is unconscionable for leaders and other believers to violate the trust of those placed in their care, to harm the most vulnerable among us, to commit sinful acts of abuse, or to cover up those acts of abuse. We categorically denounce all forms of abuse, and we are committed to truth and to listening and learning. As an organization, we pledge to do well and to do better in helping churches prevent abuse and in providing support to survivors of abuse. We have a biblical, moral, and ethical obligation to ensure that our churches are safe from predators. And I personally want to use the full extent of any influence I may have to make our churches safe and to support survivors. Through SafeChurch, we are committed to providing resources to equip our churches so they can be vigilant in preventing abuse and empowered to minister healing and hope to survivors of abuse.